Imagine for a moment that the ultimate barrier standing between you and the absolute mastery of any given skill has absolutely nothing to do with a shortage of natural talent, a lack of free time, or limited access to educational resources. What if the true culprit is actually something far more insidious and subtle? What if it is a hidden trap, woven seamlessly into the very foundation of how the vast majority of human beings conceptualize the process of learning? There is a highly peculiar phenomenon that occurs the very second a person assumes they have grasped a new concept. Their mind simply relaxes. The mental engine powers down. It ceases to ask probing questions. It eagerly moves forward to the next topic. And yet, if you were to suddenly stop that same individual and challenge them to articulate what they just absorbed using solely their own vocabulary, expressly forbidding them from leaning on the precise terminology heavily featured in the textbook, something truly astonishing unfolds. That perceived mastery completely disintegrates. The vocabulary words might still be hovering in their mind, but the actual profound meaning is entirely absent. Let us be clear, this is not some inherent defect in a person's cognitive ability or intelligence. Rather, it is a catastrophic flaw in their methodology, and it is a pandemic that exists absolutely everywhere. Step inside literally any academic classroom, or wander into any environment where individuals are striving to comprehend highly complex material, and you are guaranteed to witness this exact same cycle playing out on an endless loop. An individual will scan through a chapter, nodding along in silent agreement as the concepts seamlessly wash over them. They might even take out a marker to highlight the seemingly critical sections, carefully underline the essential terminology, and perhaps even jot down some aesthetically pleasing notes in the margins of the page. Eventually, they snap the book shut, overcome with a deep sense of self-satisfaction. They firmly believe they have put in the requisite hard work. But a vital transformation has completely failed to materialize. Yes, the raw data has successfully passed through their retinas, but it has not organically mutated into genuine comprehension. You must realize that the chasm separating these two distinct conditions, merely possessing raw information versus harboring true understanding, is the difference between night and day. The former is incredibly fragile, fleeting, and practically destined to evaporate from your memory. The latter, however, is tremendously resilient, enduring, and deeply ingrained. Possessing mere information forces you to remain permanently reliant on outside reference materials and rote memorization. Cultivating true understanding, on the other hand, transforms you into an unstoppable force. So, what is the standard protocol for most learners? The majority of people treat their brains as if they were sterile metal filing cabinets. They gather pieces of data and desperately attempt to file them away in a neat, meticulously labeled, and strictly organized fashion. On the surface, this approach feels remarkably logical. After all, isn't this exactly what traditional education has relentlessly instructed us to do? We are told to read with immense care and pay incredibly close attention to the most prominent bullet points. However, the human brain simply does not operate like a static filing cabinet. Instead, it functions as a sprawling, dynamic network, an infinitely complex web of synapses where individual concepts inherently attach themselves to other concepts. To truly understand one isolated element, you must inevitably grasp its underlying relationship to the broader ecosystem of ideas. Consider the scenario of someone reading a dense physics textbook. When they commit to memory the fundamental rule that force equals mass multiplied by acceleration, they have merely acquired data. But true understanding blossoms when that same individual can watch a toddler pushing a miniature toy car across a living room floor and vividly visualize that exact mathematical equation playing out in real time. It is when they can accurately forecast exactly what will occur if that toddler shoves the car with greater intensity, or if they swap out the tiny vehicle for a significantly heavier one. It is when they can flawlessly explain precisely why hurling a dense baseball demands a vastly greater application of physical force than tossing a hollow ping-pong ball at the exact same velocity. That, right there, is the gold standard of true understanding. Tragically, the vast, empty void sitting between those two states is precisely where the overwhelming majority of educational endeavors go to die. However, there exists a specific cognitive strategy, a distinct paradigm of thinking that can effortlessly and completely bridge that intimidating gap. This strategy is not overly convoluted or mathematically complex. Yet it demands something that the average person will go to extraordinary lengths to dodge: genuine hardship. I am not referring to the superficial hardship of torturing yourself by scanning the identical page 20 times until the paragraphs blur into an illegible gray smudge. Nor am I talking about the soothing, comfortable hardship of meticulously transcribing notes with increasingly flawless calligraphy. I am talking about raw, unadulterated difficulty, the daunting challenge of coming face to face with the reality of your own ignorance and confusion. Here is exactly how this mental framework operates. Take whatever intricate topic you are currently attempting to master, and vividly imagine that you are completely obligated to teach it to an individual who possesses absolutely zero foundational knowledge regarding the subject matter. You cannot simply summarize it or give them a brief overview. You must legitimately instruct them. You must break it down and build the explanation from the absolute ground up. You are required to utilize the most basic, everyday vocabulary imaginable. You should even sketch out rough visual diagrams if the situation calls for it. And here is the paramount, non-negotiable rule of this exercise. You must perform this entire routine without ever sneaking a glance at your textbooks or your handwritten notes. What unfolds immediately after you begin this exercise is nothing short of an epiphany. In a matter of seconds, you are going to slam headfirst into an impenetrable brick wall. A theory that you confidently assumed you had mastered will instantaneously morph into an ambiguous, hazy mess. A framework that felt crystal clear while your eyes were passively scanning the page will aggressively resist your attempts to articulate it aloud. Out of sheer desperation, you will find yourself frantically reaching for highly technical jargon simply because you are fundamentally incapable of illustrating the actual underlying mechanics. In a flash of brutal clarity, you will recognize that you only know what a phenomenon is named, but you possess absolutely no clue as to what it actually is. Now, this precise second, this deeply awkward, highly uncomfortable realization of your own intellectual blind spots is undisputedly the most critical and highly prized milestone in the entire journey of learning. Regrettably, most individuals sprint in the opposite direction. They hastily flip their textbooks open, frantically searching for the officially sanctioned vocabulary and the academically approved phrasing, desperately grasping for absolutely anything that will hastily pave over their cognitive potholes. But that reactionary instinct is completely backwards. That specific pothole is not a failure. It is a glaring, neon signpost pointing directly toward the exact conceptual area that demands your immediate, focused work. The human intellect possesses a deeply captivating characteristic. It has the capacity to hold information in two radically distinct paradigms. First, there is the superficial, shallow layer. This layer is exceptionally brittle, heavily reliant on specific terminology, and entirely bound to the immediate context in which it was absorbed. This is precisely where the lion's share of your data resides immediately following a conventional studying session. Sure, it might be just enough to help you correctly identify a multiple-choice answer on a standardized exam, particularly if the exam explicitly mirrors the exact wording of your course materials. But it evaporates incredibly rapidly and equips you with absolutely zero real-world power. Then, there is the profoundly deep layer. This realm is robust, highly flexible, and entirely independent of any specific context. Data that is anchored in this deep layer does not merely sit there passively. Instead, it actively and continuously connects to every other concept in your mind. It can be accessed from multiple diverse angles. It can be seamlessly adapted and applied to novel situations. Best of all, it effortlessly survives years of absolute non-use. This is the exclusive breed of knowledge that transforms a person into a truly capable individual. The ultimate mental trick that will render you unstoppable is simply this deliberate action. You must ruthlessly force everything down into that deep layer. Never again settle for the surface. And the ultimate forcing mechanism to achieve this is the act of explanation. The moment you strive to explain a complex idea utilizing simple terms, you are not merely reviewing it, you are ruthlessly testing it. The exact place where your verbal explanation begins to stumble is the exact place where your comprehension is shallow. Let this be an ironclad rule. Every single concept that you are incapable of explaining without resorting to insider jargon is a concept that you do not truly grasp. The human mind is remarkably skilled at faking understanding when it is merely reading. It is, however, Fundamentally impossible for the mind to fake understanding when it is forced to construct a comprehensive explanation from scratch. What exactly is transpiring within the brain when you read, as opposed to when you explain? Reading is inherently passive. The author has already executed all the heavy lifting of organizing the ideas, hand-picking the vocabulary, and meticulously engineering the sentences. The reader merely follows along, and if the writing is sufficiently clear, following along creates the powerful illusion of understanding. But make no mistake, this is borrowed understanding. You are comfortably riding in someone else's vehicle. Explaining, conversely, is fiercely active. You must build the structural architecture yourself. You alone must decide what comes first, what elements depend on other elements, which specific details actually matter, and which ones are merely distractions. You must find your own unique words, formulate your own original examples, and, most critically, confront every single gap in your knowledge head-on, because there is absolutely nowhere to hide when you are the one doing the explaining. Here is the deeper, foundational principle driving this mechanism. Understanding is not a static object that you possess. It is an active process that you do. It is the vigorous, ongoing procedure of connecting freshly acquired information to your pre-existing knowledge base, of actively seeing patterns, and of recognizing the exact same underlying principles operating across entirely different environments. You simply cannot execute this passively. The neurological connections do not magically form themselves. They demand effort, friction, struggle, and immense mental work. When someone truly, deeply understands a subject, they can explain it in a multitude of different ways. They can initiate their explanation from entirely different starting points. They can utilize completely different analogies. They can instantly adjust their explanation based strictly on what the listener already knows. This unparalleled intellectual flexibility is the definitive signature of deep comprehension. It undeniably proves that their knowledge is not trapped in a single, rigid form as a memorized string of words. Instead, the concept has been successfully decomposed into its most fundamental components and can be seamlessly reassembled into whatever specific form the current situation demands. Consider how this philosophy applies to something as universally basic as why the sky is blue. The vast majority of people who have previously heard the scientific answer can vaguely tell you that it has something to do with light scattering. This is the epitome of surface knowledge, but ask those same individuals to explain the phenomenon without being allowed to use the word scattering, and many would instantly struggle. Ask them why the sky isn't violet, since violet possesses even shorter wavelengths, and the overwhelming majority would have absolutely no answer for you. Ask them to pick up a pen and draw a diagram showing what is actually happening physically to the light, and you would see their supposed understanding completely fall apart. Now imagine someone who has forced themselves to truly, deeply understand this mechanism. They could explain it using vivid analogies, perhaps comparing it to how small obstacles disrupt waves in a body of water in a vastly different manner than large obstacles do. They could seamlessly explain exactly why evening sunsets radiate red by applying the identical underlying principle. They could accurately predict what the sky would look like if they were standing on a planet enveloped by a completely different atmosphere. They can effortlessly answer unexpected left-field questions because they intimately understand the core mechanism, not just the superficial label. This is exactly what the mental trick produces. It does not yield memorized trivia answers. It yields actual breathing comprehension that can adapt to absolutely any question thrown its way. Furthermore, this method extends far beyond individual isolated concepts. It works miraculously well for mastering entire academic subjects, wildly complex systems, and deeply interconnected ideas. Take absolutely any field you desire to master, whether it is mathematics, physics, biology, engineering, philosophy, or whatever specific passion calls to you. The highly traditional approach is to trudge through the material chapter by chapter, topic by topic, feeling a fleeting sense of satisfaction when each specific section makes sense as you read it. But feeling satisfied in the fleeting moment of reading is absolutely not the same thing as understanding. Instead of falling into that trap, after studying any piece of material, forcefully close the books. Take out a completely blank sheet of paper. Start explaining the material entirely from scratch, acting exactly as if you are teaching someone else. Do not merely write out memorized textbook definitions. Force the concepts into your own original words. Draw your own custom diagrams. Create your own unique examples. When you inevitably hit a detail you cannot explain, mark it down. Do not immediately look it up. Pause and analyze why you are stuck. What exactly do you not understand? What specific piece of the puzzle would you need to know in order to continue? Then, and only then, are you permitted to go back to the source material. And when you do not just mindlessly reread the entire section that confused you. This time around you know exactly what baffled you. You are armed with a highly specific question. The learning process instantly becomes targeted and ruthlessly efficient. You are no longer passively absorbing generalized information. You are an active predator, hunting for a specific piece of understanding to patch a very specific gap in your armor. Undoubtedly, this entire process is uncomfortable, but that is exactly how you know it is working correctly. Experiencing comfort during the learning process usually means you are not actually learning much of anything at all. You are merely reviewing, rehearsing, and blindly reinforcing the data you already possessed. Authentic, transformative learning happens exclusively at the jagged edge of your understanding, out there in that highly uncomfortable space where things are not quite clear yet. There is something else happening beneath the surface here too, something subtle but incredibly profound. Whenever you forcefully restrict yourself to explaining complex things in simplistic terms, you are mirroring exactly what the greatest teachers in history do. You are aggressively stripping away all the unnecessary pretentious complexity. You are digging down to find the essential, unvarnished truth hiding underneath the intimidating technical language. Yes, technical language is often necessary when extreme precision is required. But mark this well. If you cannot first explain the core idea simply, then all of that fancy technical precision is utterly meaningless. The human brain naturally seeks out patterns and connections, but it desperately needs assistance. It needs to be forcefully pushed to make those dormant connections explicit. When you read a textbook that says, "Energy is conserved," you have merely acquired a standalone fact. But when you actively explain why a swinging pendulum continuously arcs back and forth, connecting the ongoing conversion bouncing between potential and kinetic energy, and then showing how this exact same fundamental principle explains why a towering roller coaster successfully operates, and why two distinct objects dropped from the exact same height will strike the Earth at the exact same time, regardless of their individual mass. Well, now you are constructing a magnificent, interconnected web of understanding. The concept stops being an isolated piece of trivia and instantly evolves into a highly versatile tool for decoding the world. This underlying dynamic is exactly why certain individuals seem to learn and adapt so much faster than everyone else. It is not necessarily that they possess a higher IQ or are naturally smarter. It is because they are approaching the act of learning differently. They are not merely wandering around collecting isolated facts. They are meticulously building towering structures of understanding. Each new piece of knowledge they encounter seamlessly connects to that pre-existing structure, heavily reinforcing it and making it exponentially more useful. Someone who is merely memorizing facts is doomed to the exhausting chore of trying to remember every single piece of data individually. Someone who has built a unified structure only needs to understand the core connections, and absolutely everything else will logically follow. Let us make this philosophy incredibly concrete. Imagine two university students intensely studying thermodynamics. Both individuals spend the exact same amount of time staring at their textbooks. Both of them can easily pass the exact same examination at the end of the week. The first student relied on rote memorization to absorb the laws of thermodynamics. They can seamlessly state those laws on command. They can recognize them when presented in test problems. They know how to plug the right numbers into the right equations. But if you check back in 6 months later, you will find they have forgotten almost all of it. The algebraic equations are completely gone. The highly specific practice scenarios they drilled are vanished. If you were to ask them to explain exactly why a solid ice cube melts when dropped in a warm drink, they might vaguely remember that it is somehow related to the concept of entropy, but the actual connection would remain incredibly blurry and vague. The second student, however, executed a radically different strategy. After reading the chapters on thermodynamics, they invested their time actively explaining the concepts entirely without the aid of the book. They initiated the process with shockingly simple questions. What is energy really? Why is it scientifically impossible for it to be created or destroyed? What does that decree actually mean in reality? They drew visual diagrams illustrating invisible energy flowing directly from a hot source to a cold destination. They thoroughly explained why theoretical perpetual motion machines can never actually work. They seamlessly connected these grand scientific laws to mundane, everyday experiences, explaining why a piping hot cup of morning coffee inevitably cools down, why a kitchen refrigerator requires constant electrical power to function, and why combining boiling water and freezing water will unconditionally give you a pool of lukewarm water, rather than miraculously resulting in one drop of boiling liquid right next to one drop of frozen ice. 6 months down the road, this second student still intimately understands thermodynamics. This is not because they were gifted with a superior memory, but because they meticulously built deep understanding instead of merely memorizing shallow facts. The towering intellectual structure is still standing. The neurological connections are still there. Even if they forget the exact formula, they can easily reconstruct the specific equations from scratch because they intimately understand what those mathematical symbols actually represent. This is the unparalleled power of this methodology. It is vital to acknowledge that this is not a quick shortcut. It heavily consumes your time and requires a tremendous exertion of real mental effort, but it yields a byproduct that is completely fundamentally different from traditional studying. It produces an elite level of understanding that drastically outlasts the test of time, a comprehension that actually grows stronger and more applicable over the years instead of quietly fading away. Think deeply about absolutely any skill you have legitimately mastered in your life, not a trivial fact you memorized, but an action you can actually perform. Whether it is riding a bicycle, playing a musical instrument, speaking a foreign language fluently, or skillfully working with your hands. Take a moment to notice how your internal grasp of that specific skill does not resemble a bulleted list of textbook facts. It is something vastly deeper, an intuition that you cannot even fully translate into words, but a capability that you can flawlessly demonstrate and apply in countless different ways. That profound intuition is exactly what real, authentic understanding feels like in any domain. The ultimate mental trick that transforms you into an unstoppable force is the deliberate act of bringing that exact same elite quality of understanding to absolutely everything you ever attempt to learn. The vast majority of society operates under the assumption that this echelon of deep understanding is exclusively earned through decades of grueling practice. But it does not. It is entirely generated by engaging in the right kind of practice. And that highly specific kind of practice is the act of forcing yourself to explain, to actively teach, and to painstakingly reconstruct your comprehension entirely from first principles. Here is exactly what this looks like in the real world. Start immediately with whatever topic you are attempting to learn right now. It truly does not matter if it is advanced calculus or basic carpentry, ancient history, or organic chemistry. The second your very next study session concludes, forcefully close everything. Pull out a blank piece of paper or track down a friend who knows absolutely nothing about the subject. Explain everything you just learned as if you are mentoring a highly intelligent student who has never once encountered this material before in their life. Pay incredibly close attention to the exact moments where you begin to struggle. Those moments of friction are highly valuable information. They are shining a massive spotlight on exactly where your internal understanding is dangerously weak. Do not judge or criticize yourself for these struggles. Be immensely grateful for them. They are performing the vital task of making your invisible blind spots completely visible. If you skip this diagnostic process, you would blindly march forward thinking you understood everything perfectly, right up until the critical moment you actually needed to deploy that knowledge and tragically discovered it simply wasn't there. When you inevitably uncover these gaping holes, forcefully resist the urge to immediately look up the correct answer. Force yourself to sit with that uncomfortable confusion for a solid moment. Think deeply about what specifically is remaining unclear. Is it an overarching concept that you simply do not grasp, a logical connection you cannot perceive, or a highly specific step in the sequence that you cannot follow? The act of identifying exactly what you do not understand is, ironically, a profoundly powerful form of true understanding itself. Then, return to your educational materials armed with a highly specific mission. You are no longer engaging in a passive rereading of everything. You are actively hunting for highly specific answers to highly specific questions. This fundamental shift makes your second pass through the material incredibly efficient. You know exactly what you are looking for. Your mind is hyper-primed to grasp it. Once you find it, immediately close the book and explain it all over again. The second time you run through the gauntlet, the explanation will be vastly better, remarkably smoother, and significantly more connected. But you will probably still trip over a few lingering weak spots. And that is perfectly fine. That friction is the reality of the process. Every single repeated cycle of explaining, uncovering the hidden gaps, strategically patching those holes, and then explaining it again violently, drags you deeper and deeper into the realm of genuine, bulletproof understanding. The true beauty of this entire methodology is that it scales infinitely. You can deploy it to rapidly conquer a single, isolated concept in 20 minutes, or you can use it to master an entire professional field over the course of several years. The foundational principle remains completely identical. Never ever settle for simply feeling like you understand something. You must relentlessly prove to yourself that you understand it by flawlessly constructing comprehensive explanations from absolute scratch. There is one final incredible aspect of this journey that is worth noting. As you slowly develop this rigid habit, this absolute refusal to accept surface-level understanding, something deeply fascinating happens to your psyche. You start effortlessly seeing through unnecessary complexity absolutely everywhere you look. You begin to instantly recognize when other individuals do not actually understand what they are talking about, even if they are heavily armed with impressive multi-syllabic terminology. You rapidly cultivate a rare, heavily armored form of intellectual honesty. You intimately know the massive difference between merely knowing the names of things and truly knowing how those things work. This specific trait makes you incredibly formidable. It is not because you have hoarded more random facts than the people around you, but entirely because the things you do know, you truly, deeply know. You can seamlessly apply that knowledge. You can continuously extend it. You can flawlessly explain it. You can confidently build towering innovations upon it. Your collected knowledge isn't just dead weight that you are forced to carry around in your head. It has evolved into a living, breathing tool that you can actively use to decode new mysteries, conquer unprecedented problems, and immediately spot lucrative connections that everyone else completely misses. The human mind is undeniably capable of achieving extraordinary things, but it absolutely requires the correct method to unlock that potential. It demands to be forcefully pushed far beyond the lazy realm of passive reception and thrown into the grueling arena of active reconstruction. It must be trained to confront its own internal confusion with brutal honesty. It must be disciplined to build enduring structures of profound understanding rather than haphazardly accumulating messy piles of disposable facts. This is the hidden mental trick that permanently makes you unstoppable. It is not about positive thinking. It is not about discovering some magical motivation to study harder or grind longer. It is simply this exact decree: never, under any circumstances, accept that you truly understand a concept until you can flawlessly explain it in simple terms entirely without the aid of reference materials. Every single time you sit down to study, every time you attempt to learn, every single time you encounter a brand new idea, aggressively close the books and see if you can step into the shoes of the teacher. That intense discomfort you feel in that moment is quite literally the physical sensation of true understanding being forged in the fires of your mind. The terrifying gaps you discover in your knowledge are actually massive opportunities. The intense mental effort required to push through is the exact catalyst that transforms raw information into usable knowledge, evolves that knowledge into deep understanding, and ultimately hardens that understanding into world-class capability. If there is only one specific thing worth taking away from all of this, let it be this exact statement. Stop reading just to feel temporarily informed and start actively explaining in order to become permanently capable. The sprawling divide separating those two states of existence is the exact same divide separating someone who has merely heard rumors about how things work and someone who actually intimately understands them. And in absolutely any field, at absolutely any level of competition, that specific difference is truly all that matters.